And welcome back, everybody, to the Podcaster Nation. That's right. I said welcome back because I know that you were just listening to our stuff and you came back for more. You wanted more, we have more for you. This is the podcast that is about podcasters, it's for podcasters, and it's done by podcasters. And you're right, you cracked the code. Our guest today is, in fact, a podcaster, amongst other things. So, this is the place where we come together to support each other as a community. This is the place where the rising tide raises all ships. Folks, dive in. So appreciative for everything that you folks have done recently, all of the sharing, subscribing, the DMs, everything. We're growing like crazy. And if you're not out there doing what you're doing, I don't get to sit over here and do what I'm doing. So I am eternally grateful for everything you guys are doing to support our podcast. Keep it going, and we will keep it going too. Before we go any further, let me introduce this awesome guy I've got with me today. We probably could have talked for another hour before we started the podcast, but we were both like, all right, let's get this going. So please welcome to the show, accessibility expert advocating for more inclusion of people with disabilities through communication and collaboration instead of compliance and shame, also known as the blind blogger, and there's a lot more coming to that story, and the host of the new podcast, The Accessibility Advantage. Please welcome Max Ivey. Max, how you doing, brother?
Doing good, brother. How you doing today?
You know, if I'm better than I deserve. I got to be honest. It's a wonderful day outside today, man.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's what, when you have as little vision as I do, you can make up the outside scenery. So it's a good day out there here too.
Okay, and we have begun. Here we go. All right. So, Max, I know everybody wants to hear, who you are, what you're about, and so on. They probably also want to know why you were dubbed the blind blogger.
Right. Um, y'all might want to get comfortable as all Texas legends. The story's a little long, but I'll try to keep it as short as possible. So I am Max Ivey, known as the blind blogger. I grew up in near Houston, Texas, in a family of carnival owners wanting to be part of the business. I also grew up knowing I'd lose most, if not all, my vision to retinitis pigmentosa or RP. And so, with the encouragement of family members, friends, teachers, scoutmasters, I managed to graduate from a traditional high school and college. I completed the requirements to be an Eagle Scout, so I'm one of the few blind Eagles. Uh, After graduating from college, I went to work for the Internal Revenue Service for a couple of years. Eventually, my mental health forced me to go back to the carnival world, which was an easier way to make a living, if that tells you anything about the IRS. Uh, I was blessed to be able to work alongside my family for about 15 years before my dad's death caused the closure of our small traveling carnival. And at that point, I realized I needed to have something to do with myself. And the only thing I thought I knew was to help other people sell their used rides. So I did that, and I decided to start a website called the Midway Marketplace, which is still in existence because I still occasionally help a small business owner sell a ride when they need to. And in the course of promoting that website and the equipment on it, I asked an owner of a carousel in a mall in Georgia if they would send me a video of the carousel in operation so I could share it with people and help them fall in love with the ride and want to buy it. So the video sold the ride in a month after it had been on somebody else's website for a year. And I thought, dang, if I can sell rides with a video, or maybe I can sell Max with a video. So, not thinking I was doing a podcast, just that I was going to record some videos and talk about some stuff available on the website, I did that. Now, I didn't have a lot of tools or ability, and I didn't have a great way to create a fancy intro or outro. So, I decided, I used to love to sing before vision loss and changing of my voice caused people to make fun of my singing. So, I decided to sing on the intro. I sang a little bit of Nat King Cole because it was December and I'd given myself a deadline of recording that first video by the end of that year, which I did. People enjoyed the singing and asked me to do more of it. In fact, there are days I think they like hearing me sing more than they like hearing me talk. But that was my first experience with podcasting, but I didn't know it was podcasting or vlogging or whatever y'all want to call it. And sometimes that's the easiest way to overcome the overwhelm and the fear is to change to what you think about it, how you see it in your head. So I didn't know what I was doing and I did it. And I did it for a while. At the same time, I was doing podcast guest interviews first to promote the Midway Marketplace. And then once I accepted my role as the blind blogger, as somebody who can inspire others doing interviews as the blind blogger. And I will explain that in just a second. I want to finish the part about the podcast. But I didn't realize that was what I was doing. So as I transitioned more to doing inspirational stuff, I kind of dropped the videos for a while and didn't think about them. And I'm doing these podcast interviews, and about every other show, they go, Max, you're a great interview guest. When are you going to have your own show? And I'm like, I don't want my own show. I wouldn't know what to do with my own show because I'm one of these people, I have to be in the moment. So I was like, how am I going to manage the technology with the level of accessibility that didn't exist then with the technology? How am I going to do that and still talk to people or have a conversation? And I made the mistake of telling hosts, like, hey, if somebody were to show up and say that they would handle the tech and all I'd have to do is talk, I'd have a podcast. Well, Fred By, the crazy Canucker, that's his choice of name, not mine, from Canada, obviously. He goes, Max, I'll be your producer and you just talk. And so we did that. And we got started and we did it for about 6 months. Everything was cool. And then, as often happens in the world, he had some changes in his family. So he decided that he was going to basically, wean me off and make me do it on my own. So, in the course of 36 hours, I realized I was going to be doing my own interview. I found out about Zoom, created an account, did a test recording with a friend of mine, and did my interview on schedule with a filmmaker from California who's losing his vision. He's losing his sight, but not his storyteller vision, as he likes to put it. So, I found a way to do the podcast and been doing it off and on ever since then. But really, I did not plan on or want to have a podcast. And, as I've done it more and more, I've realized that I just really enjoy having the conversations, whether I'm the host or the guest or part of a panel. So podcasting has been a real source of enjoyment and entertainment, along with giving me the opportunity to educate, inspire, motivate, and in the case of accessibility, share best practices and help people overcome the overwhelm around being more inclusive. So this is how I got started in podcasting. Like I say, I never wanted to have a podcast. Now I've got two of them. What's your excuse? So you wanted to hear about the blind blogger, and you got to hear about the blind blogger before I can tell them about what's your excuse, which is what I changed, which is what the podcast became with the help of my friend Fred By. So about 12, 13 years ago, I'm doing the midway thing, and people are starting to talk to me about being inspirational. And I eventually said, okay, I'm ready to be an inspiration. I need a website. What do I call myself? And they're like, Max, we've been calling you the blind blogger on LinkedIn and Facebook for a couple of years now. So if that's available, that's who you need to be because that's who you are. So it turned out there was the blindblogger.net was available, even though .com wasn't. So I said, good enough, and started doing the work as the blind blogger. Now, back then, and pretty much the entire disability community was of the belief that there would be a stigma around being disabled and working online or running a business online. So most people with a disability were hiding their disability, whether that be on their website URL or about me pages, or that be their social media profiles. Well, I was not only not hiding mine, I like to say I was shameless at promoting myself. So I became the
All
blind
right.
poet, and that's still part of who I am, and it's a big part of who I am. But at that time, there were blind people who are like, Max, we're really not happy with you playing the quote blind card unquote. And I had sighted people who were like, Max, you're too talented. You're too great a storyteller. You do not need the crutch of focusing on your disability to be successful. And I lost friends from both groups at that time. And eventually I'm like, well, if that's going to break our friendship, then we weren't great friends to begin with. I just started doing the work. And I mentioned about the podcast, how we started it. And again, as part of being the blind blogger, I've done a lot of things online that, to me, that were very challenging. A lot of this stuff, building a website by teaching yourself to code HTML, adapting to social media, considering that it changed every 3 seconds, building an email list, switching from Windows to Mac. A lot of things I've done have been challenging. And people are like, Max, we are inspired by that. And a phrase started to pop up in my comments section. It would say something like, Max, if you can do this, then what's my excuse? Or I told a friend of mine what you're doing, and I told him, if he can do this, then what's your excuse? And the name just stuck. So the podcast, once we finally got it going and decided, what it was going to be about, inspirational with people who have overcome challenges of all kinds, who will share how they exactly went about doing it more so than the challenge itself or the success they are now. Because to me, the how we get from where we were to where we are to where we want to be, that's the important part of the show. So what's your excuse was a big part of that. And I still have that show. I haven't done a new episode in a while because last year the people at audioi.com offered to give me a job hosting their podcast. And so I felt like I needed to take some time from my podcast to learn about working with a team because I had never done that before. And also working in the corporate world on creating a podcast, which is a whole different animal than creating your own podcast. Because I mean, let's just put it this way. If it's my podcast, I can say, Rory, I want to interview you for my show as soon as we're through here, and we can press stop and we can press record and we can do that. And I could put it out tomorrow if I want to. No, you can't do that with corporate.
Right.
It's a big learning curve. So I paused. What's your excuse? The show is called Hearsay Shorts. And it looks like we're gonna end here, say shorts, and they're going to transition to sponsoring my new podcast that you mentioned, the Accessibility Advantage, which is a good fit for them and a good fit for me. They're only going to be sponsoring one episode a month, but the money's going to be the same. So I'm not arguing. I'm not unhappy. Plus, I'm hoping the fact that I have a sponsor for one episode a month means some other people that want to promote their investment in accessibility are going to want to sponsor an episode of the podcast in the future. So that part of it's all good. The accessibility advantage is really about the fact of the matter is accessibility is in everyone's best interest. When you improve accessibility, you improve the user experience for everybody else who doesn't have a disability, especially people who visit your website or your app through mobile devices. When you improve accessibility, you raise your search engine rankings because the search engines have figured out what the best practices are and they are looking for them and they know how to find them and they will give you love if they see them. So improve search engine rankings. And the big thing is if you improve accessibility, it gives you the opportunity, not a guarantee, but the opportunity to reach a huge, mostly untapped market of highly loyal consumers who will advocate for your business or brand if you're willing to make the sincere effort. So that's the purpose behind the podcast. The podcast is going to feature some short one-on-one tutorials from Max. I know you're thinking, Max, do short? Yeah, but I've done a couple of 5 minutes already, so I think I can handle it. Some short one-on-one tutorials, some case studies of past or future clients where we discuss where they were when we started, where they are now, why they decided to invest in accessibility and some of the challenges along the way, and doing some interviews with business leaders or organization leaders who have come to understand the value of accessibility. Because it's one thing if I talk about it. I'm not a CEO. I'm not a C-suite. I'm not a big time entrepreneur. But if I can get people who had to overcome the resistance of their teams, their marketing people, maybe even from some of their customers, and they made it work and they've seen the positive benefits of inclusion. I get those people out in front of the world, then I can convince the designers, the developers, the marketers, and all these people behind the scenes that investing in accessibility is important and doing it from the beginning rather than trying to add it in later.
Wow. Brother, that's an awful lot to
Yeah,
unpack. I
yeah,
mean,
and
that's
we
a
didn't
great
really
story,
talk,
brother.
and yeah, we really didn't talk much about my vision loss or my scouting or my carnival days or the fact that I now write and record my own original music. So there's a lot of stuff I left out just to focus on podcasting.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna have to have you on my other podcast so we can talk about all this other stuff. But
I'm always available.
All right, man.
I'm always here. Um, and even when I'm not here, I'm usually available to record because I know you told me that you were going to ask me the question, but this is a really good transition for it. So I'm going to go ahead and answer your question about Why do I love podcasting? Okay.
Okay.
Um, but, but so here's the thing. Okay. And this can apply to anybody, whether you see yourself as an introvert or an extrovert, however you see yourself. But here's the reason. The thing I have come to learn that I love about podcasting is, and this was true before COVID, but even more so during and since, this is an opportunity to have a conversation with one other real, live, breathing human being who, in many cases, either gets you, understands you, or at least respects his craft enough to find out about you. So these are conversations you can't have out in the world. You can't have, man, how often has your elevator pitch led to having coffee or a drink or meeting somebody definitely the same day, the same week, the same month? It just doesn't happen. But with a podcast interview, I can sit down, I can have a conversation with you. We can talk before the recording, which we did. We will talk after the recording, which we will do. And the really cool thing is almost every time I sit down to record, not only am I here trying to educate, inspire, and motivate, I'm here to learn myself. Because what I've found is when I have conversations, I will often be reminded of things that are important that I either haven't learned before, haven't thought of that way before, or just forgot and stopped doing. Because the truth is us human beings have to relearn a lot of the important lessons in life and podcasting. So this is why I enjoy it. And this is why I schedule them at 7, 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. If your butt is dragging on Monday morning, here's how you fix that. Schedule a podcast interview for 7:30 or 8 o'clock on Monday morning. Because if you can sit down with another human being and have a conversation and not have your day change for the better, then you got bigger problems than I can help you with.
It's a great advice, brother.
And I like to see everything as an experience and as an adventure. But another thing I do with podcasting is I get up early, I get my shower, I get my shave, and I don't put on my headphones anymore. But I used to would put on my headphones and I would go, "Ooh, it's showtime." So, but really, the attitude around having these conversations, the opportunity to get in front of your audience of people who are, very interested in this subject, who are either trying to find a way to continue doing what they're doing or trying to overcome the fears and overwhelm around starting a podcast. So that's why I do it. I enjoy it. And I feel like if people thought about podcasting in a different way, maybe if you could find a way to tell yourself you're not doing a podcast so that you can do a podcast, maybe that would work.
Well, there's the second part to that question, and you can tell you're a podcast host, man, because you're just a step ahead of me the entire way here, and I love it. So, the second part to that question, is there anything about podcasting that you really can't stand or that, you hate? I'm not sure where I'm going to go with that one, but you know what? I'm at this
Yeah, yeah,
point,
yeah, yeah. We know where we're going with that.
let's go, brother.
Okay, here's the downside. If you're a solo entrepreneur on a budget, or if you're beginning a podcaster and you don't have a lot of money to throw around, you have to do all this stuff yourself. So recording the conversations, even recording solo content, which I know scares a lot of y'all more than interviews, but even recording solo content, that's enjoyable. But once you do it, then you have to download it, you have to upload it, you have to create a blog post around it. You have to do social media around it. You have to respond to your email. I know all of these things I should be saying you get to, but if you're asking it from the point of view of a negative, then for a lot of people, those are the negatives. And as a blind person, a lot of that stuff is either not accessible or not highly accessible, or the tools I'm choosing are not the best tools, because my bottom line decision is what is most accessible, and then next is what is most affordable, and then finally what is best tools. So, like for example, um, for 5 or 6 years, I was using Mad Mimi for my email provider for my newsletter. Now, I know a lot of people look down on Mad Mimi because it was very simplified, but in my world, simple has value. Simplified websites are great for accessibility. Minimalist websites are great for accessibility. So my world, simple has value. Mad Mimi had a very simple format for me to create a newsletter and send it out and be done with it and go on to other tasks. It also had a robust social customer support team where if I didn't feel like creating my email, I could send them an email and I go, look, this is the email I want to send and this is who I want to send it to. Now, would you do that for me? And they would. So
Hmm.
Mad Mimi is gone. GoDaddy bought them out, and I've been over to GoDaddy, and it's like when Disney bought Star Wars. It's like they decided, okay, we got all this great stuff. Now we're not going to do none of that stuff. We're going to do our own stuff, and that's kind of what GoDaddy has done with Mad Mimi. They've decided they're going to do their own stuff, which is, as you know, bells, whistles, and more bells and more whistles, which doesn't help me at all. So I've been wandering around the internet trying different email providers. In the last week, I've tried MailerLite and Mail Octopus. I'm continuing to try them until I find one that is accessible. And when I find one that's accessible, I'm going to do a podcast episode about it. And I'm going to promote my butt off for them because that's what us disabled people do when we find something that works. But that's just one aspect of a podcast. Social media, creating a blog post, doing podcast interviews is great, but anytime I do an interview, I've got workflow related to being interviewed. And then, of course, with social media, those people over in social media, they ain't happy unless they're changing something. You know,
Right.
they just ain't. I'm sorry. I understand that everybody wants to. I understand if you have a check, you want to keep getting that check, but there should be a penalty for updating a website just to update a website. I'm just saying.
I can't disagree with anything you just said. All right. You're on fire, so I want to make sure we dive right into it. I've been sitting here since we booked this thing, and I've been looking at what you had to say. You give advice for bloggers, podcasters, and live streamers on growing their audience by seeking their to make their shows more inclusive. And I've been sitting here going, how can I, as a podcaster, yeah, fairly accomplished one, uh, that's never even entered my mind. And so I feel bad by saying that, but also I'm like, hey, what can I do to make it more accessible on my end?
Right. So first, I'm going to make you feel better. I'd say most people have never thought about it,
Okay.
and that's one of the things that I believe. It's one of the things that the majority of the people in the disability community believe now, and that is um, lack of accessibility is not a vendetta. Most people don't get up in the morning thinking, how can I make this site harder for people using screen readers, screen magnifiers,
Right.
mechanical switch devices? They don't get up thinking, how am I going to make those people's lives harder? Because we don't want them here anyway. That most people don't think that way. They just don't know what they don't know. And at this point, you've grown your podcast very successfully on your own. And what I'm going to talk about with accessibility and inclusion is very good for continuing to do that. But I think this is especially important for the newbies because one of the biggest problems we have when we start is anybody going to listen? Is anybody listening?
Right. Yeah.
Why aren't they listening? Why aren't and being able to say that your content is inclusive and being able to be friendly to people within the disability community is one way that you can reach more people with your podcasting content and hopefully get off to a better start that doesn't depend on your friends and relatives being your main audience for the first month or 6 weeks. So here's the thing, a couple of things. One, when you most people that are recording podcasts today, as we are recording video and we're gonna export the audio. But at least half of the world is still listening to podcast content. So since your audience is mostly listening, that means most of them are just as blind as I am. And
Gotcha. Okay.
we don't think about that. I mean, so when you're doing your podcast, if you're recording a video, exporting an audio, whenever possible, if an important moment happens, try to take a second and mention that to people who are listening. So another thing you can do is what's called an audio description, and I'll do mine because this apparently I threw this out in a podcast a few months ago, and the woman host misunderstood what I was saying. We had an awkward moment about what she was wearing. So we're not going. So I'm going to go first today. I am a 59-year-old Caucasian male. I have medium length, or excuse me, short brown curly hair. I got it cut recently, with some gray and some white in it. I have brown eyes. I'm wearing a blue button-down shirt with the collar open because I'm going business casual today. I'm recording this in a kitchen chair because my office chair just broke, and I'm recording this from my bedroom, which is also my office. I have retinitis pigmentosa or RP. I have almost no vision. They say I have light perception, but most people understand total blindness better than they understand light perception. You don't always do this, but in some cases, I've been asked to share my pronouns, which are he and him. And so these are the kind of things you would mention. I don't have a dog or a cat, so if you have an animal that sometimes makes an appearance, you may want to include them in your description. I blur my background because my background's a white wall, and I think people wouldn't want to look at that anymore than they really want to look at the blur. But if you have stuff on the background that's important to your podcast, you may want to mention. If you have stuff that recently changed in the background of your podcast, if possible, ask or suggest to your guests that they do an audio description. And I'll be more than happy for any podcaster that wants it. I'd be more than happy to create a real short RTF file of what needs to be in an audio description or doesn't, if you want to have that to share with your guests in the future. But like I was doing a podcast the other day by a guy who's really he's obviously been around people with disabilities more than most, and he said something, and I started shaking my head from left to right very vehemently, and he took the time to let people know that I had responded to his to what he had said or what the other person on the call had said. So anytime you can bring in some audio content to explain video content to the people who are listening to you, that's a way to build that connection, make people feel more involved in the podcast, create more loyalty with your listeners. And it will take time to get used to doing it. It's going to feel awkward in the beginning. And it's something you're going to have to remind yourself to do along the way during an interview because it just isn't natural. But that's what makes it cool because you're doing something that shows that you do care, that you're doing something that is awkward, that will take practice. And that's the kind of thing that carries weight within the disability community. So beyond the audio description, um, obviously you need to have your closed captions and you need to have a transcript. The images on your website, your podcast, your blog, all of those need to have what are called alternative text descriptions. And you have 150 characters to 180 characters that are indexed by the search engines that will track what you say about your images. So please don't leave those blank. Let your website builder app just fill in random text or stuff them with keywords because that doesn't help us and doesn't help Google. It's really good if you can put some descriptive language in there that helps us understand why we should care about the image or the information attached to it. Say if the image is part of a header, part of a link, a button, connects to a video or to your podcast, and it's very helpful to search into the visually impaired. Also, if you have an image on your website or anywhere in your online content that doesn't have an alternative text tag, for people who use screen readers, which is probably about 25% of the vision loss community, that content does not exist. It's just not there. It's one of those things that if it's not coded, it doesn't exist to screen reader users. Now, screen magnifier users will still know it's there. Mechanical switch device users, people who depend on their voice to navigate the internet, all of that, they will still see it, but people like me would not. So even while I would prefer, descriptive text, be sure there's something there so that I know it's there when I'm navigating your website. The other thing a lot of people do is they will have links or buttons, and the buttons or links have images that aren't labeled, or they have no label at all, and I have to guess where those links or buttons take me. Another thing, and this is something I did in my first 101 tutorials, most people still don't understand that people using adaptive technology like me don't have access to the mouse. So anything that you build into your website that requires a mouse click, I may or may not be able to use it. The odds are I won't be able to use it, especially if it's important, because I can't tell you how many times I've gotten to the end of a long submission form or at the end of a shopping cart process and about to buy something, and that last button was not clickable because it was coded for mouse users instead of people like me or keyboard users. So design your websites, your blogs, keyboard use first. Take a minimalist approach, which I mentioned earlier. Take a simplified approach because every bell or whistle you add to your website is an opportunity to mess up accessibility. And you'd be surprised how simple it can be. I recently had a conversation with one of the email providers about opt-in forms. And in their thing, they had a choice between pop-ups and embed. And I'm like, Well, I wanted to use the embed, but y'all's thing wouldn't let me use the embed because there was an unlabeled button actually. But because quite often, if a pop-up opt-in is not coded correctly, the person using adaptive technology will get stuck in there, and the only way they can get out of there is to close the website or to close their browser. So it's one of those things. It's simple, right? It's just a little pop-up to get people to give you their email address, but those simple little things can cause problems with accessibility. So if you don't need a link or button, if you don't need information on a page, leave it out. If you don't need something to make your website actually work, then leave it out. But if you feel like you have to have this stuff, then be sure and either test your website or hire somebody like me to test your website and tell you what you need to do better. And there are a couple great ways for y'all to test your websites. One of them is Waves, which is completely free. The other one is a company called Audio Eye, which I mentioned before that I've done some work for on a contract basis. They are more in the enterprise level, and I focus more on the small, medium-sized businesses, the sauce level businesses. So I don't really see us in competition. They have a free checker on their website as well. They will ask you to sign up to their email list. Big surprise there. And they will send you emails about the latest content. Who knows? You may even get an email about a blog post Max has written. So those are a couple ways you can do it. And then as far as, hiring somebody to do it, I am available. And one thing I've been offering lately on podcasts is if you are watching or listening to this, then you can reach out to me through the accessibilityadvantage.com and I will review the homepage of your website for free with no obligation or expectation, just trying to help you be better at what you do so that you can be more successful more quickly and hopefully be able to sustain whatever it is you're trying to do. Because every entrepreneur has a passion project, or they wouldn't be out here trying to make a living as a solo entrepreneur. One last thing I like to say about podcasts, and this is something you cannot fix as the host, is the show artwork, because I have yet to figure out who to ask at Apple or the other places as to why you do not get alternative text with show artwork. But since that is done through your RSS feed, through the syndication process that you use when you add a podcast to Apple and the other podcast players, it's not something the host can change. But if the artwork for your podcast that you're submitting to the hosting company and to the syndication companies, if that's the same as the artwork on your website, then you can kind of help out a little bit with that by creating a really compelling alt text for your show artwork on your website or your blog that goes along beside wherever your player is posted on your website. But it's surprising even now that Apple has not figured out a way for people to include alt text. It basically just says show artwork. That's the only description you ever get, because there has to be a description or they'd get in trouble.
Wow. I got to be honest. I mean, half that stuff is just stuff that has never even crossed my mind. And yeah, I mean, certainly I would never be on the other side of, trying to intentionally do that. But I mean, you're right. It's just we don't know what we don't know out here.
Yeah, and here's a couple of things I didn't know to make everybody listening feel better. A little while back, I discovered that because Zuckerberg is red green colorblind, I found out that if you put red or green on a website for somebody who's red green colorblind, it will display as gray. So if you are going to use red or green, and a lot of us use green in those buttons for people to push, you need to outline it with a different color that can be seen by people who are red, green colorblind or otherwise colorblind. So I recently found out that GIFs are not only not accessible to screen readers, but they can trigger people with neurodevelopmental disabilities, including people with ADHD or PTSD. And I also recently found out that by offering a wider variety of color selections to people with dyslexia, they are more likely to find a color palette that helps them have the highest level of reading comprehension when on your website. And then just one last thing that I knew about this, but I just recently learned its value to everybody else, and that is the option of being able to invert the text colors on a website, so you can switch it from black text on a white background, switch it to white on a black background. That's an accessibility thing that was created for people with low vision using screen magnification. because their eyes are already strained, and the switching the contrast to the inverted colors really helps with their eye strain. It turns out that people using mobile devices can more clearly see the text on mobile devices in high or low light when have the option of inverting the text. So that's one of the many cases where
Hmm.
something was created for the visually impaired or somebody with another disability has turned out to benefit everybody. So it's not just improving websites that benefits everyone. A lot of times it's technology. And one last thing that, and this is one of those that really most people didn't know about. It's one of those funny things when I ask email newsletter providers about it now, some of them actually know the answer, but most of them still don't. Is most mass email programs either don't have a way to add alt text to the images you put in your email messages, or if they do, it's so.
Well, I lost you there. Are you back?
Yeah, I'm back. I said
Oh, okay.
most of the email newsletter providers don't have the option of adding alt text to images that you send in your emails, or if they do, it's so hidden.
Hmm.
Are we having trouble?
Somebody, yeah, somebody does not want you to get that last line out, man, because they keep cutting you off. Looks like Big
Yeah.
Brother doesn't want you to talk about mass emails.
Yeah, I know, it must be. So, are you hearing me?
I'm hearing you just fine now. Yeah, it looks like you're
Okay,
back. Yeah.
good. All right.
That's
Okay,
so crazy.
good.
Both times you tried to talk about mass emails, they cut you off.
I don't know. Maybe I'm just not meant to be in that field. I don't know. But but it's that, and that's one of the things that you really want to do. If you're going to work with somebody, you want to find somebody who's continuing to learn about not only the adaptive technology that affects them personally, but also the things that affect people with other disabilities or other life challenges that have similar effects on the person's life as having a disability. Because a lot of people don't think of aging as having a disability, but aging comes with vision loss, with hearing loss, with lower motor control, with less balance, a lot of things that, are just having a disability. And so we have to make sure it's really simple for somebody to start your podcast player for somebody, who may be only is tech new to them or relatively new, but, they're also having to navigate tech with less faculties because they're getting older. So
Hmm.
this is why I talk about the positive benefits, because not only are there a lot of obvious benefits, but there's the results of adaptive technology on the public in general. There's the undocumented numbers of people aging, dealing with technology that need help with accessibility, and really it does help people stand out. It can give you a competitive advantage, and in the field of podcasting, it can definitely be a way to connect with an audience and not just people with disabilities, because like I said, a lot of people are still listening, and every single one of those is just as blind as I am. But there are also a lot of people who put on videos who then do other things and don't look at the screen. And so those audio descriptive moments that you've put in there for your listeners are there for your podcast, for your video audience. Another thing that is happening in television is with audio descriptions for television programs, for movies, and even for some live events. um, People who don't have vision loss are starting to turn those descriptions on their TVs using the secondary audio channel, and then turn their back on the TV and go do the laundry or help kids with homework or whatever, because those descriptions combined with the usual dialogue from whatever show they're watching, they don't need to look at the screen. Just like, there's 40% of people under 30 who won't watch a video if it doesn't have closed captions. And I'm not talking about people with hearing loss. I'm talking about just average people, because we all know there are people watching videos in places they shouldn't, or about content they shouldn't, and they just won't. They just won't even uh, attempt to listen if it doesn't have the closed captions, even though they don't need the closed captions.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
So Just one last point. I mentioned using website checkers earlier, and a lot of people are going to ask me, well, Max, what about automation? What about audio? What about artificial intelligence? And with automation, the key thing there is to make sure the automation is built with input from people with a wide variety of disabilities, and that input came in the beginning and that continues to be there to update whoever is creating that automation, whether it be a plugin or an overlay. Because if it's not being created by people with disabilities, it's not going to understand the nuances that go beyond the established standards of the Website Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. And if they don't continue to bring in people with disabilities, they're not going to understand the newer technology and things that do change over time as far as what are considered best practices and what aren't. And with artificial intelligence, there are some things it does really well. I recently had a great experience with JCPenney where the artificial intelligence told me that the pants I was fixing to buy ran small and that I should pick a size larger. I was buying those pants to go to a conference where I was going to speak and be in public for 5 days. I took the advice of the AI and bought the next size up and was very comfortable the whole week. I wouldn't have known about that without the help of their engine. So things like that, AI does really well. It can do alt text descriptions, but at this time, Google and the other search engines are still giving you credit for creating alt text. So at this point, I wouldn't depend on the artificial intelligence for nothing other than the SEO value. But it can do some of that. Its descriptions are often vague and less detailed than an actual person would do. But the actual person still has to try to put themselves in the other person's place and figure out what they need or want to know. The other thing AI could do, but it doesn't, would be things like explaining what color names mean, giving information quickly on size charts. There's a lot of little stuff on websites that could be more accessible, more enjoyable, and that would also help people who don't have disabilities. But there's a limit to what it can do reliably, and there's also the conversation that continues to go on as to the fact there's not enough disabled voices at the table in these companies building these engines. And there's a very real fear that the AI will either not be used to create more accessibility when it could, or that, like human beings, it may ignore us or decide that we don't have enough value to be considered by the efforts of the AI program. So that's on the advocacy side. That's way above my pay grade. I'm more about helping people do it than I am about making sure the AI is functional. And we've got some great nonprofit organizations that advocate for that. So, but AI is coming, and there are ways you can use AI and its prompts to give you information about what would be accessible under WCAG. But when you use the regulatory basis for what's accessible, you're going to get the bare minimum, and you're also not going to have the benefit of understanding the workflow. A lot of times, a website can be accessible but not enjoyable or not usable because the way they have met the standards was basically just meeting the standards, um, because of the limitations of adaptive technology. People with disabilities navigate websites and apps differently than most of the public does. So a website can be accessible by the regulatory standards, but it may not still not be enjoyable or highly usable because they didn't understand what order to put things in, or the way to arrange things on a page, or how a screen reader navigates a table, or how it navigates a select box or other aspects of a website or a form. So those are things that you can only get from people with disabilities, and AI is fairly limited in what it can do there, just as automation. Most of the automation apps also will only tell you what's wrong. They won't fix it for you. And if you run across an app or an overlay that says it can diagnose 100% of accessibility issues on your website and that it can fix everything for you, you'll never have to worry about it again, run screaming in the other direction, because that's going to get you sued.
Appreciate the candid advice, brother. I gotta give it to you because this might be the easiest podcast I've ever had to do. If I'd have known I was going to have to do this little work, I'd have brought a sandwich. I mean, you never know what's going to
Uh,
happen when you put a podcaster in the other chair. But I mean, you've you've asked all your own questions that I had written down to ask you. I mean, brother, you've answered them beautifully. So you've done a
well,
great job delivering your message
yeah. Well, I appreciate that, and I hope that I did this in a way that's valuable to you and to your audience because you know them better than I do. But
for
you know,
sure.
I've been doing podcast interviews since 2013, so this makes 12 years, and you know, we've actually lost track of shows I've done. There are actually podcasts I've done that are no longer out there. But we figure I've done somewhere between 500 and, 650 as far as interviews over the course of that time. Because there were times I was doing in the very early days promoting the Midway Marketplace, I was doing 7, 8 podcasts a month.
Wow.
Sometimes even, it's because I enjoy doing it. I mean, you just sit down, you talk to people for a while, you learn stuff about them, you remember stuff about yourself. And you share stuff. People tell you you're inspiring. They tell you that you're motivating. And sometimes you even make connections with a host that lead to business opportunities or lead to opportunities for you to help them or help somebody in their community. So, that's the other thing is we're not just having a conversation. We're not just promoting a business or a brand. We're starting the process of building a friendship that can lead to us helping each other and helping our related audiences.
Love that. Absolutely love it. I usually end with and in the essence of time, I do need to wrap it up. But the usually I am with a question about giving out advice. You've given a ton, and the best advice, honestly, was the whole bit about how to make it more accessible. I mean, you've got that on a format or on a document or something that you're willing to send out. Yes.
I don't have the document yet, but I'm going to create the document and I will send it out to you and you can send it out to them.
I would love that. I would
Yeah, I
that
can.
would have a lot of value to me and the other podcasters who listen to the show. So
Sure.
I appreciate that very much, sir.
Yeah,
Um,
thanks. But yeah, see, I told you I would learn something. You basically just told me, Max, you need to create this list as a lead magnet. So thank you for that, Rory. That's very helpful.
I'm glad I could contribute something today. So that's
Yeah, yeah.
beautiful, man.
All right, so I do have some advice, and I did ask you earlier if I can sing before we're through. So my advice
100%.
is My advice is that none of us are meant to do important, big, scary things by ourselves. So build a community. If you don't have a community, start today. You can even start by reaching out to Max and asking me to be part of your community. I'm happy to help people, especially in the early days. We're not, and I know people are scared of asking for help. They're also scared of asking for opportunities. This is because asking for help makes you think about feeling weak or inept, and asking for opportunities makes you feel like you're egotistical. But here's what you want to remember about both. When you refuse to ask, you rob the other person of the joy they would have received.
Hmm.
And I'm going to say that again because it's the most important thing I've said today. When you refuse to ask, because you made a conscious decision, when you refuse to ask, you rob the other person of the joy they would have received.
Gotcha. And you wanted to end with singing a little
Yeah,
bit
yeah,
for
because
a minute or
well,
two.
because I had to overcome my fear of singing in order to do my first videos, and because I have a little bit of a song that's all about podcasting. So
All right. Well, you know what? If you want to go ahead and hit that as our final question, you can go
sure,
right ahead.
sure, I appreciate it. I appreciate your indulging me. So never wanted to have a podcast. Was real happy being just a guest. People said I'd be good at it. Thought maybe if I had a sidekick, interfed by that crazy Canuck. He said, I'll produce and you just talk. We got started, he was true to his word. And now the blind blogger's known around the world. If I can do it, what's your excuse? What's holding you back or what's stopping you? Go on and do it. What's there to lose? If I can do it, what's your excuse?
Man, all right. Well done. What, you know what? Well done, brother.
Well, thank you. I
That
know
took
it ain't perfect or close, but it's real, and that's the best value of my music is they'll never have me on American Idol because my stuff just ain't produced enough.
Brother, I love it. I love it, man. You're awesome,
I
and
appreciate it.
I love your message. I love your attitude and your energy and your vibe. And I just want to thank you for coming on the show, sharing everything you shared. Very important stuff for all of us to think about, sometimes for the first time. And I appreciate it. I know a lot of other podcasters are going to appreciate it. And Max, thanks for coming on the show, brother.
All right. Well, thank you, Rory. Thanks so much for having me on the show and for giving me the opportunity to go where we all went today. I appreciate you, brother.
You got it. Folks, this has been another awesome episode of the Podcaster Nation. This is the podcast that's about podcasters, it's for podcasters, and it's done by podcasters. This is the place where the rising tide truly raises all ships. So keep sailing.